and we're here in Bromwell. I think it's appropriate that we all stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance with the flag right here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. We so appreciate you making time out of your day to be here. Obviously, this is an important discussion. I don't think it's hyperbole to suggest that this is probably the most important mayoral race, certainly in my time in Denver, almost going on 30 years now. And we're excited for these two great candidates to be here. Mike Johnston and Kelly Brough have been serving this community for many, many years, albeit in very different ways. And both of them certainly hope to carry on that legacy by winning this mayor's race. So we thank you both for being here. Also want to thank Ed Sealover. For those of you that don't know Ed, Ed was formerly with the Denver Business Journal. He was a senior reporter there. And I will just say, off task, a very fair and thorough reporter. He's now doing something new. He's working for the State Chamber of Commerce. Ed is going to moderate tonight's discussion. He has a list of questions that we've prepared. And a big thank you to our co-sponsors tonight, the Chair of the North Neighborhood Association, the Chair of the Steering Committee. And I'd like to say thank you to Bromwell for allowing us to be in your space tonight. So a big round of applause to all those people. Just to be clear, we have boys and girls rooms in this building. They are located through that opening down here and two others in the lobby, should you need the facilities. Now, there's one thing I'm concerned about. There's a box of tissues on Ed's table there. I'm hoping this doesn't come to tears tonight. If it does, I'm blaming you. So anyway, with great pleasure, I want to turn the time over to Ed and our candidates. And thank you all for being here.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here tonight. Just a real quick overview of how we're going to do this. We're going to have 2-minute opening statements from each candidate. Then we're going to go into a series of questions. We're going to go for as many questions as we can get in the next hour here. We'll ask the candidates to keep their responses to 2 minutes. And if I hit you with a follow-up, just try to keep that within 1 minute as well. And then finally, we'll have 2-minute closing statements from both the candidates. But enough about the rules. Let's get right to the discussion. And through coin flip, Kelly, you have ended up with starting us off here. Give us your 2-minute opening statements.
Well, first, thanks for the opportunity to be with you. 3 reasons why I would ask for you to vote for me. The first is my professional experience. I actually have run the city before, and while I've never been a candidate, and that will become evident more and more to you, because I'm probably not your typical candidate. I have run the city when I was John Hickenlooper's chief of staff when he was mayor of Denver. And for me, I think this is critically important because the issues we face today really require somebody who knows how to not only run a large organization, but run the city. And I want you to think about all the places in your lives that are being impacted today that you probably 5 years ago didn't give a second thought about how they were running, that you don't feel safe today, that your streets aren't taken care of in a manner that is working for you, whether it was plowing them or filling your potholes, that the transportation system isn't working how you want it, that we don't have housing that's affordable, that we have people who are unhoused throughout our city, that if you get 2 hours to the airport ahead of schedule, you're probably still going to maybe miss your plane. We have so many challenges today, and these are all responsibilities of the mayor. But not only do I bring the experience to be able to help drive the city, improve operations, and frankly, improve your lives, but I also, I think more importantly than never running for office before is I'm not running for another one. And what that means is I'm going to be able to make the decisions about the operation of our city that are about improving your lives every single day, never being about my own political aspirations, because I don't have any. And I think the challenges we have ahead of us and the work we have to do together require someone who can bring together the public, private, and nonprofit sectors and focus on your needs and deliver results. I'm excited for the conversation tonight, and I thank you for the time.
Thank you, Kelly and Mike.
Thank you. I was thinking on the way over tonight, how many of us have had this experience, which is you are walking in downtown Denver with your kid or your grandkid. In my case, it's my daughter, and you're holding her hand and you're talking and you round the corner. And as you round the corner, you happen upon someone who is sleeping in the middle of the sidewalk, or a couple of folks huddled in an encampment. And your daughter or granddaughter suddenly kind of holds your hand a little bit tighter, squeezes closer to you, and looks up at you with this combination of heartbreak and fear, as if to say, Dad, why are you letting this happen? And I think the answer is we don't have to let this happen. We have a moral obligation to be a city that can be both great and that can be good, and that can make sure we can provide housing for everybody in the city. We can make sure that teachers and nurses and firefighters who serve the city can still afford to live here. We can make sure that you can take those kids any neighborhood, any night, and sit on a patio and have a drink and feel totally safe that they were able to play right next to you. That is not the city that we have right now, but that is the city that we can have. And for me, my dream is, how do we get a city that not only do we know we love working and playing and living in, but one that you can walk through with your kids or your grandkids and feel proud about what we built, about what we'll pass on to them, about what Denver will be, not just now, but 10 and 20 and 30 years down the road. I have a vision to build that Denver, and feel like with the coalition of people in this room and across the city, we can deliver that city that our kids and grandkids will be proud of. Excited to talk about that tonight, and thanks so much for having me.
Yes, that was her. So yes, we're working on that. Well, thank you. We're going to get into a couple rounds of topics here that you're probably familiar with, but we're going to try to do these a little more Cherry Creek centric. We're going to start out with the topic of public safety. But here in Cherry Creek, there's been some specific concerns. It's a neighborhood that's experienced daytime carjackings, nighttime vandalism, and they both involve youth suspects. So for both the candidates, how will you address specific concerns about youth violence and gangs? How do you limit youth carrying guns? Mike, we'll start with you on this one.
Great. It's familiar for me being back in the school cafeteria, because I spent most of my early career as a teacher and a school principal. And in that capacity, I had the chance to both lead traditional high schools and also led schools with kids that had serious histories of criminal behavior. I ran a school in a juvenile detention center. I ran a school that served all kids who have lived in residential treatment settings. And so I have spent my life working with kids with just that set of needs. And so I think there are a couple of things I would do. One is we start with prevention. We want to make sure that young people, when they're in their formative years, have access to the positive experiences and positive peer groups that help them find their passion. That means for me providing after school and summer school programming that would allow particularly low income kids to get access to arts and athletics and tutoring and science camps, the things that many of our kids or grandkids have had the opportunity to do that help them find their passion. The second is intervention. When we know that you do have young people that are getting into trouble, those signs become evident early, whether it is skipping a day of school, or whether it is getting caught for a small burglary, or whether it is having access to a gun. Once the first time we found a young person who has had access to a gun, the risk that they are going to hurt themselves or hurt someone else goes up astronomically, which means you have to do massive wraparound services for those young people at that moment. That means therapy, that means family support, that means supervision, that means intervention. And sometimes that means finding the right school setting for them. You know, I think that one of the tragic things we saw this year in East was that every student should have access to a free and public education. It doesn't mean that some of our students with the highest needs, the right placement for them is in a 3,000 person comprehensive high school. If you have already been expelled from another school for possession of an AR-15, you have a risk of bringing guns to school previously. I had a school that served students like that. We had 40 students and 12 staff. We had psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers. There are settings where we can make sure and provide really safe support for those young people, make sure they get an education and they get back up on their feet. For me, those are the really key steps of prevention, intervention, and also the right placement. And then finally, I would just add that I will not add that because I'm out of time.
I'm glad to see everybody's in line already. Thank you.
I know Linda will tell me if I don't do it right.
Kelly.
Yeah, well, I'll start by sharing a story. When I was chief of staff, our chief of police came to me in May of one year and expressed concern because we were seeing a rise in gang violence in our city. And his concern was we're headed toward another summer of violence. And often with a chief, your first discussion is about hiring additional officers or putting more officers on the street. Instead, that summer, we opened our rec centers for free for the first time in Denver's history. In exchange for that, I actually got funding from Kaiser to do that. In exchange, I tracked youth violence, and we saw a reduction both in our kids committing crime, but also our kids as victims of crime. So in my administration, you can expect to see every single member of my cabinet have expectations about their role in helping prevent crime and address youth crime. But I also want to talk about some of the crime you're seeing on your streets and in your neighborhoods. Some of the issues I think we have to address there is we don't have enough officers today. We know that. We're about 10% short. We have been for years. That's about 150 officers. I have been endorsed by the 480 officers in our city today as a candidate, and I'm working with them on exactly how we can recruit more officers, but also free them up to be at the issues you most critically need them at. Sending mental health responders instead of officers whenever we can. Using technology to try to address some of the issues that we're facing today. Focusing on how we can recruit officers by using our existing force to assist us with that work where we've had real success in our history. Those are the things you can expect to see from me as your mayor.
Well, thank you. That segues very well into the next question, which was exactly how are we going to go about getting the officers on staff to do these things that you want? So I'll leave this a little open-ended so both of you can kind of talk about those issues. But when you talk about getting those officers, it's a long time drag that we've been short of officers here in Denver. How specifically do you intend to find them, and how do you intend to deploy them to neighborhoods such as this? Kelly?
Yeah, I just attended, we had a graduation about 2 or 3 weeks ago now from our academy where 36 officers were coming out. As a matter of fact, Nick, when we gave the pledge, it made me think about listening to those graduates give their pledge to keep us safe. And frankly, it was moving to hear their commitment to our community. When you ask those officers, sometimes you all ask me, why on earth would you run for mayor? I didn't ask it that way. I asked them, why did you choose this to serve our city as a police officer? And one thing they all had in common was they knew someone who was either an existing or a retired officer who encouraged them to apply. So I've been talking already with our officers about how we could utilize existing officers to assist in finding and encouraging people to apply. And I think to get them to do that, Ed, which is the key question, is they got to have trust and confidence in their mayor, that we can defend the actions we need them to take and we can hold them accountable. And the truth is there's no relationship in any of our lives where you don't have to do both of those things. And as your mayor, I know I'm capable of doing both of those things. But I also think we have to shift our culture in our police department a little bit. And this is the other thing I've talked to officers about. And that is to be more transparent and open. I actually think if our community sees more what our officers are doing day in and day out, it'll raise confidence about the interaction that they're having in our community. But I also think it'll invite others who want to be part of protecting and serving because they'll get a better glimpse of what it means to be an officer in our city today. I'm doing this under the 2 minutes and I just want to say, that's amazing.
There goes any need for me to compliment either of you. Mike, how are you gonna bring in officers? How are you gonna deploy them in neighborhoods like this?
Yeah, I think those two things are connected. What you want to do is recruit people to a different kind of job because it has a different kind of community-based relationship. So what I would start with is what we want to get back is what we used to call community-based policing, which is the simple idea that as an officer, you have a beat. You have 4 or 6 blocks of neighborhood that you walk every day. And you talk to business owners and you talk to residents and you are present, visible on the street. You can answer questions. You can even prevent those crimes before they happen. It's the basic rule of being a high school principal. You walk the halls before kids come out into the halls so they know that you're already there. Right? And what you find is if that is the kind of job you are drawing people to, then there is a different kind of applicant who also wants to enter that job, which is, that means you can draw people from those communities they serve, who have those relationships, want to be a service to their neighbors, and can earn the trust and respect of those neighbors long term. I think that's critically important. That means different kind of recruiting, different kind of training, and different kind of deploying. But in addition to this, you also have to just make some common sense changes. Like right now, the way that we hire officers is that it often takes about 7 months for them to go through a preliminary screening before they can even enter the academy. If you go to neighboring jurisdictions, that might take 60 days, which means if you're applying to Jefferson County and to Denver, let's say 60 days in, Jefferson County says, you have a job, would you like it? And you call Denver and say, hey, I have an offer. They say, well, if you just wait 5 more months, we'll let you know if you might have an offer. It turns out competitive applicants don't say yes to that offer. And the applicants we lose the most in that competition are women and people of color who are looking and are highly sought after in this field. So it's a part of what the city can do better in terms of expediting hiring. It's part of changing the kind of the job to attract a different kind of people. And then it's about retaining and recruiting folks who are now inspired to say, yeah, if you're asking if I would serve my neighbors and be present to help them feel safe, I would sign up for that.
Great. One more public safety question with a very specific local angle, and that is this. Recently, local shop Fascination Street Art Gallery held a fundraiser to help the police department buy vests to protect against high velocity bullets. My question to you is, should local fundraising be responsible for police safety, or should the city increase the police budget to buy better protection for our police? Mike?
My answer to you is no. No, there's no way that we should be having to host fundraisers to support core safety for officers. I think that's also true for firefighters right now who have chemical PFAS that is present in their carcinogenic chemicals that are in officer and firefighter gear right now. And we have a 1.5 year wait to approve $1 million purchase that would prevent them from having carcinogenic chemicals in their body every time they come to our neighbors or your grandmother's house to be able to support someone, which means they're not just exposing themselves, they're exposing others. This is a place where you have to prioritize within the budget. And I think the ability to say safety of those people who are keeping us safe ought to come first. And we ought to be able to make sure that we can do that. I think there's plenty of space in a $4 billion budget to make sure you can prioritize the safety of officers. And that also goes to how do you make people feel seen and respected and supported in a way that makes them want to be able to keep that job or want to feel attracted to that job. You don't need to give them the protection they need to do the job. It's hard to say this is a job you value enough to encourage even more people to enter. So for me, this is one of the symptoms of what happens when you don't show that you're going to support these folks and you're giving the resources they need to succeed.
Kelly?
45 seconds to spare.
Sweet. Oh, yeah,
Name
now
that tune
now
in
it's a
45 seconds.
competition. Everything is a competition. Well, let me answer it by giving you an example of how strongly I feel the answer is no. Somebody shouldn't have to provide the equipment that keeps our officers, our deputy sheriffs, or our firefighters safe. In our Department of Safety, we have 3 departments, police, fire, and sheriff. All 3 of those have collective bargaining units. I've negotiated all 3 of those contracts in my career multiple times. Happy to tell you lots of great stories about doing that. But one example is when we were negotiating with firefighters, our firefighters described some safety equipment they needed because our force was diversifying with women coming on it. And we needed separate showers when we were in a hazmat situation, and they wanted to negotiate as part of their union contract. Not only did we say we would not negotiate it, we paid for it. That is exactly what we should be doing as a city, is making sure our public safety personnel feel that kind of support, and it doesn't come out of their paycheck, or it's not a negotiated option. And so my answer is absolutely no.
Thank you. Well, let's move on to a different topic here. That's one you both discussed again, and that is affordable housing. Both of you have talked about the idea of increasing affordable housing throughout the city, but I'm curious how that plan would look in a neighborhood like this, where housing is frankly a little bit more expensive than the community in general, but yet this neighborhood still needs people to live and work here. How would you deal with affordable housing in Cherry Creek?
First, I'll just say I'm pro affordable housing. And then I'm done. No, just joking. It was a competition. Remember who could go the fastest? One thing about Cherry Creek is definitely the density here in the last 10 years has really grown. And I think I hear from neighbors here who say it's exciting and fun. And I hear from neighbors here who say, holy smokes, I don't think we prepared our transportation system or anything else for what we're experiencing today. So let me start by saying I think we're challenged, not only because of the cost here, but frankly, because of what has been developed and how far along we are. But I still want to share with you how I'm thinking about opportunities throughout our city. I've been the chair of Habitat for Humanity last year. I've been on their board for a number of years. This is a for sale, affordable product that we build throughout this region. We know owning a home is how you build wealth in this nation, and we're removing an entire generation from being able to do it. Today in Denver, about 4% of our products are condos. I can give you all the gory reasons why. In other cities, it's about 20%. We need more of those entry-level home ownership opportunities, and I would build them throughout the city. I would build them on publicly owned property, looking at parking lots. That's primarily what we own. It's not a great use. It's not even a great use in Cherry Creek North. And I got to tour this in Munich, where you build on top of the surface parking, the parking remains, and you build affordable units for sale. In this case, I saw 100 family units next to a rec center, and it was beautiful. I would look around our city at spots that make sense, where we're close to light rail stops and major bus routes, where we could build that kind of density and have a for sale product. So people who live and work in our city and are making good wages could own in our city again and begin to build wealth. Their kids can go to schools that they never could have accessed, and our families can start to be in communities they never could have afforded.
I want to do a quick follow-up on that one. You talk about we're going to go ahead and build condos on public land, but nobody's building condos right now, and it's for reasons far beyond what the city can
Well,
hit.
it's primarily for liability reasons, as you know, Ed. And a city, you actually have governmental immunity. And so you can start to look at building a really high quality, beautiful product for sale that is still affordable and deliver it to our residents.
Okay, that answers that. Mike, how would you deal with affordable housing in Cherry Creek?
Thanks. I think there are two parts here. One is about affordable rental units and one is about affordable home ownership. And the key is we have to be able to provide rental units that we know are going to stay permanently affordable. Because right now people have the fear of every month where they're going to get kicked out or evicted if the rent goes up again, and that's happening all over the city. So I spent the last 3 years as the CEO of the foundation in Denver called Gary Ventures, but spent the last 2 years working on just this problem of affordable housing and what we could do statewide to take it on. That culminated in the ballot measure you all saw last year, which was Proposition 123, which was the first statewide ballot measure we've ever passed successfully to take on affordable housing. And here's what we discovered, and here's what I would do in Denver, which is I would build or convert 25,000 units across the city to be permanently affordable rental units. And what that means is that if you live in one of these units, you don't have to pay more than 30% of your income to rent. So if you are a first-year teacher at Bromwell and you make $40,000 a year, you can actually rent a unit where your rent is not more than $1,000 a month. And your rent doesn't go up unless your income goes up. And that's made possible because these units are financed by CHFA, by the Colorado Housing and Financing Authority, which means you have the capacity to keep those rents low while still building units that are mixed income. So you might have 10 units in a building, 6 or 7 of them might be market rate, 2 or 3 of them might be affordable, but they look the same, feel the same, have the same furnishings, and you have the ability to really integrate those teachers, nurses, firefighters into our neighborhood. I think that means that looks different for different neighborhoods. I live in Central Park. We've also had about 4,000 units go up along Central Park Boulevard because it is in a high transit area, close to light rail. You want density in those places. What we want when we build density is we also want affordability included in that density. We've had a lot of density built in Cherry Creek, not a lot of affordability built in Cherry Creek over the last decade. And so there's a possibility of doing that both. Second one is you do want people to be able to get access to affordable home ownership. And there are 2 ways I would do that. One is through providing down payment assistance. And the other one will be a secret you will never know until I answer.
I'm going to pull you back for a follow-up question on the first part, though, even though we're not going to do the second part here. You talk about you can do that in Cherry Creek in terms of affordability. How do you do that in Cherry Creek? Do you look to find, market rate apartments and try to somehow bring them down for the? Do you look to build? What?
I was looking retrospectively. If you look at all the units that have been built over the last 5 or 10 years in Cherry Creek, they've been thousands of units, but most of them, I think nearly all of them are at market rate. If we thought about planning this proactively with now the funds that are available, you could have taken a project like that and said, great, if we're going to build at Second and Steel, they're going to be 100 units, how do we make 30 of them affordable? And the financing through CHFA would enable you to do that by a financing scheme that makes it much less expensive to build. And so that's the way you can approach this in any neighborhood. I think you can still, if there is more density to be added in Cherry Creek, you could have that conversation, but it can also be gentle density. It might just be 8 units that are being built or a quadplex, but you can still have 1 or 2 units that are affordable. So I think that's possible in all neighborhoods. I think we've missed the chance in some of our neighborhoods to have done this proactively. We have a chance to do it, I think, much better going forward.
Excellent. Let's keep talking about the workers that are needed here. Some of them are not going to want to live in Cherry Creek. You still need to get them into Cherry Creek. How do you get workers into Cherry Creek? And I'm specifically wondering here about transportation options. How do you get workers into Cherry Creek? And if your answer involves the term public transit, do you rely on RTD or are you doing something more Denver specific?
I was going to say sleigh, because that would be an easy way to get people in on sleigh. Just thinking of always coming to Cherry Creek Mall for our Santa photos. So I think there are a couple of things. One is we do in other parts of the city have to make it much easier to use public transit. There is not easily accessible direct routes to and from Cherry Creek right now, and so it makes it much tougher for people to get to or from work on those routes. One of the reasons why this is not working is we don't have a lot of ridership. So we don't have a lot of ridership. There are fewer routes, there's fewer reliability, and you get into a doom loop of not well-functioning public transit. I think we want to reverse that doom loop by providing incentives for more people to ride public transit. That's particularly true when you're talking about bringing people to and from downtown, where we have both light rail or bus lines that we want to see more full. That's why I've proposed partnering with businesses to make it free for commuters to commute to and from downtown as a way to both take cars off the street, as a way to make more people come back to work downtown and to reduce our impact on climate. But I think we have to look at partnering with RTD on how do we get more direct lines that can make it easier to get to and from Cherry Creek. I think to do that, we have to show we can increase ridership. And then we have to figure out how we can partner with RTD to get that done. And if they can't get that done, I think we have to look at other options for RTD.
Kelly?
I live in Corey, Mayoral. My answer would be, how do you get to Cherry Creek is very slowly. Because, we used to all avoid Colorado Boulevard. Now University is facing the same challenge. The truth is I actually ride my cruiser bike most times now when I come into Cherry Creek because it's easier and faster. But I don't think that's going to be a solution for all the workers who need to come into Cherry Creek. If I recall correctly, I think we have a BRT planned for first. Trying to remember, or maybe just rapid major bus route through it. I think there's lots of questions about how that would work, the efficiency of it. Do we have the volume on it? What would be the impact? How does it move people if we have to adjust those streets significantly to try to move people along them? I looked at the routes we have currently along Colorado Boulevard, which probably has the best bus service close to Cherry Creek. And I think there's some planned improvements there. Here's what, and I don't know the details of all of the plans of what's happening around transportation for Cherry Creek. I know this. We have not planned to have as many people as we have in Cherry Creek, as many people as we plan to move in and out of Cherry Creek as we're trying to move today. And what we're doing is not working. And I think we have to take a moment to reset and ask the question, where are we making our investments and what should they look like so we actually can move the people given the density we have put in Cherry Creek. And probably the greatest hope for Cherry Creek North is that you get a mayor who can actually revitalize downtown so that another 1,000 businesses don't come out of downtown straight into Cherry Creek. And the good news is this is a beautiful neighborhood. It is amazing, but I can also see it's not working. And so I would work with community to figure out how do we make the transportation in your neighborhood actually work. And you have some incredible leaders leading that work for you today.
Thank you. You brought up a subject that was planned for a little later, but I'm just going to jump to it now. And that is the idea of First Avenue and bus rapid transit. I mean, the question is a fairly simple one here. Should First Avenue host bus rapid transit, or do you need to put a pause on that and think about that somewhere else?
Do you know what I love about running for mayor? You're just supposed to be an expert on every single question people ask you. Kelly, world peace. I actually, so a couple of things. We have a vision 0 in our city. This is a vision that we kill 0 pedestrians and 0 cyclists. And the more investments we're making right now, the worse we're getting at killing pedestrians and cyclists. And that's the reason this is important is when you talk about a BRT, you're actually talking about more pedestrians. I'm a commuter on my bike. I'm pro Vision 0, and we're doing a pretty bad job. I actually think we do have to take a pause and ask the question, are we making the right investments? Are we actually improving safety? Where should they be? What does it look like? And then proceed and go forward. But this is not the only community struggling with where are we displacing traffic when we make these investments? What does that look like 2 blocks off? And I think as a city, we have an obligation to do those studies to understand the implications before we jump in. I also will say, I think we have an opportunity to even run a pilot and test an idea so we could see what's the impact and start to prove out, well, how might this look or how does it impact a neighborhood before we take the full step. And I can give you examples of other cities who've done just those kind of pilots so that we get a sense of if your concerns are accurate or if what we were hoping for is accurate. I would say yes to a pause so we can regroup and make sure we're accomplishing our goals, which are moving people, but doing it safely.
Mike, world peace. No, I'm sorry. BRT on First Avenue.
I'm going to take Israel and Palestine for 400. I think that one of the challenges we have is we have a lot of plans being built, sometimes not connected plans by neighborhoods or by cities or by mobility type. Right? We thought a lot about what the bus rapid transit map looks like. Separate set of folks are thinking about what the citywide bike map looks like. And then a separate set thinking about what the mobility for cars looks like. And I think what we want to be able to do is to say, how do each of those networks overlap and what is the best possible vehicle to get to the best neighborhood in the right way? It's sort of like the game of Clue, right? It's like, you know, Colonel Mustard in the library with lead pipe. What is the combination of the mode of transportation, the commuter, and the capacity? Yeah, I would need to sit down and listen more to neighbors here about what the concerns are. But I think we at the very least want to have a theory about how that BRT line connects to our theory about traffic flow, connects to our theory about bike movement, connects to our theory about other mass transit, and see if we think those are going to deliver the right outcomes we want, the right structure. Because I'm not convinced right now that we can do them, and what the priority is of which we do. I think our first priorities have to be the largest number of people that will move along Colfax as a first start. And if we could get that up and running, it'd be a helpful place to begin.
Thank you. And once again, you all have led me to rearrange the order of questions because you brought up something that I hear.
Just trying to make it difficult.
That we've discussed here in terms of alternative transportation. Bikers have taken to the Cherry Creek Trail next to the mall in droves. Yet a number of pedestrians and slower bike users say it's getting too dangerous for them to be on the trail with the high-speed bikers. So does the Parks and Recreation Department need to modify park and bike path systems to deal with issues such as this? And also, what about bike lanes into the business areas of Cherry Creek that are not connected to the bike path?
So this was a good segue. You're right. That was a helpful suggestion. So I think this is where you see congestion along bike lanes the same way we see congestion along streets. You got to think about how many people are moving and do we have the right lanes to move them. So I think what I would like to see us do is build on some of, the Vamos project or some of the other shared streets efforts. We're looking at how do we move bikes throughout the city in a way that creates what bikers will call high comfort bike lanes, which means not just ride your bike down 17th Street and just pray you don't get hit. Or not, here's a street with some paint on it, and if you ride in the paint, hopefully you won't get hit. But how do you actually have either medians that separate bike lanes? Do you have the plastic sticks that separate them? Do you have elevated bike lanes? And then what you want is a network of arteries, the same way you have public transit. You want a map like you have a light rail map or a bus map that says, here are the major bike thoroughfares that can get you from Cherry Creek to downtown, or can get you from Lowry to downtown, or from Elyria down to Cherry Creek. And I think if we overlap that map with what the bus map is and what the traffic map is, you can figure out how to do more of, if you remember the shared streets program during the pandemic, it was how do you slow traffic on certain streets to be able to allow bikers and pedestrians to use them, and then accelerate traffic through others. I think this is an opportunity for us to say, how do we think strategically about what streets or paths should really be prioritized for bikes? And then how do we have an easy to use map, both online and available, that you know exactly what the best route is if you're taking a bike from one side of the city to the other.
And I want to follow up on that one, go back to the other part of the question here. And you can talk about this in general, rather than just back to Cherry Creek, but how do we deal with these conflicts between speed bikers and pedestrians or slow bikers on some of our public paths right now?
I think it's the same way you have to deal with different flows of traffic along city streets, which is you have to have streets that are, or lanes that are built for people that are faster and more expert, and lanes that are built for people that are either pedestrian or more recreational. And you may have places where professional commuters like Kelly are using different routes than folks that are recreational like me. And that may be part of our awareness. Is how do you figure out which are the ones you'd feel comfortable taking your kid out for a ride on versus which are the ones where you have commuters trying to make sure they can get to downtown in 8 minutes.
Kelly, that was a lot. So if you need me to repeat that, but the two ideas are basically how do we deal with the biker pedestrian conflict and how do we connect bike paths?
Yeah. This is where I'm Kelly Brough and I bike on the Cherry Creek Bike Trail, but I'm slow, so I'm not the person you're upset at. So when you get downtown on the Cherry Creek Bike Trail, it's interesting. The trail separates downtown where pedestrians are on one side and cyclists are on the other. And I will tell you, I actually think it works pretty great. And we all follow the rules pretty well down there. I'm intrigued by that idea. Certainly more bike lanes on streets. I also know the challenges of that as well. The upside of having a trail is you really do get to ride very safely. And if we really intend to provide the opportunity for people to get out of their cars, we really have to make sure they're safe. I'm interested in looking at, could we separate those so that you have walkers and bikers on two different trails when we're down there? There's no question, we have a speed limit on that. I wish I was going so fast, I could tell you I was worried about getting pulled over. But I see what you see, cyclists who are really hauling through there. And so I also think there could be an enforcement component to all of this. And then I think as we build our trail system out, what we really have to do is make it so that when I click that bike icon and I'm trying to map myself to someplace I'm trying to get, we have actually mapped it. So the route is a pretty thoughtful route. Does it require me to go significantly out of my way? And it's on the safe side streets. And I'm going to give you an example. We put a major bike path on South Broadway. And I'm going to tell you something. I've never put my body on a bike on that bike path ever. I will ride on a side street and go 2 blocks off every time. I think we have to really start thinking about where do we put our cyclists so they're safe and they're not being put in a major thoroughfare. And I think we're capable of doing that. And frankly, I got to tell you, one of the best assets we have is our trail system here for walkers and bikers. I think together we can figure out how to utilize those trails and make sure everybody's safe doing it.
Thank you. One more angle of transportation we haven't talked about. This seems kind of odd that this may be coming in last, but there are people who actually still drive cars, as old-fashioned as an idea as that is. If you First Avenue in particular is something we're talking about becoming more congested, but all of Cherry Creek is seeing more traffic and it's going to increase with the development of Cherry Creek West. So how do you holistically deal with that issue in terms of managing many modes of transportation? I'd say in this neighborhood, but certainly you can expand that to all neighborhoods here. I mean, how do you look at balancing different types of transportation for a neighborhood?
Yeah, this is I actually think Cherry Creek is the poster child for this challenge of building a lot of density in a short period of time, and then us saying, oh, our roads are still the same size and we have nowhere to go. And we have not created a culture who says there's an alternative or options that make those alternatives easy. So I think this is our partnership with RTD. We have to figure out how we make that system work better for all of us. And I actually think this is a conversation, Ed, that has to happen almost neighborhood by neighborhood. Because if you're in half a mile of a light rail station, which I am, it's pretty easy to walk to it. It's easy for me to give you my alternative answer to get around the city. But if you're not, I think we have to explore what does that look like, from circulators to alternative approaches that can get people to those transit options. The truth is we do have to change how we get around, but it's not going to change until we make it easier for people to change. So I would go neighborhood by neighborhood to explore what would it take to get you out of your car? What does that look like? And it doesn't mean all the time. It doesn't mean we all get rid of our cars. We never drive again. That certainly is not what we're proposing. But we know we have to come up with alternatives because our roads are limited. We only have what we have. We know our air quality is a challenge and a problem. We know we have environmental issues. There's numerous reasons we're going to have to find a different way for us to get around. So I would have planning neighborhood by neighborhood to work with you to identify how we change our behavior.
Thank you, Mike.
For me, there are two parts of this. One of them is about urban design, and the second one is about reducing vehicles, miles traveled. The urban design one is part of the challenge of Cherry Creek is you all did it right, which is you created a setting of a neighborhood where you have walkable access to restaurants, to shops, to services, to movie theaters, and you have the capacity to do that in a walking distance. A lot of neighborhoods that don't have access to that come here because they want to come here to play and eat and drink and hang out. The more neighborhoods we can develop that have that same kind of walkability, where you can come out your front door, walk to a favorite restaurant, walk to the dry cleaners, ride your bike to your kid's school, the easier it is for those neighborhoods to develop that. What we know is most of our public transit is built around commuters. It's built around folks who want to get to and from work. And so the lines don't always come to places like Cherry Creek because this is where people come for errands. And errands you normally have in your car because you got your kids and you're picking stuff up and you're making multiple stops. And so this is an example for us of how urban design can work well, but you're a victim of your own success. And because we have that in a lot of other neighborhoods, many people come here to have that experience. So it helps us think about how we do that kind of development in places like Colorado Boulevard, close to the light rail stop, so that there is the same kind of walkable community. The second is we do really need to, for our interest in climate, which we may come to, try to get people to use cars less frequently. And that means both pushing away from gas vehicles towards electric vehicles, which I was proud to sponsor the tax credit at the state legislature that did that. It also means doing things that we can at the city, like moving away from our own fleet vehicles that are using gas and instead moving all of our fleet vehicles to electric. And then it means making public transit easier for when you can use it for commuting. You might not be able to use it right now to get to and from a movie or a shopping trip at the Cherry Creek Mall. But if you can do it for some of those routes you're getting to and from work, then that reduces the number of cars on the street, which makes it easier for folks to get around in places when they're going to do errands.
Let's segue here into just the neighborhood design, especially having sat through an 8-hour hearing on land use design at the Capitol yesterday.
Sorry about that.
I say that because this is a topic that's going to come up again at the Capitol and here in the city. In fact, when we're talking about this neighborhood, it's important to note a lot of efforts have gone into creating the Cherry Creek area plan, so growth here is guided and not haphazard. So with increasing talk at both the Capitol and the city about needing to upzone, as this plan already has done so in some ways, and to accommodate more construction, how do you balance those citywide goals with the idea that neighborhoods should be able to plot their own future?
I think the way that you approach this, and this is the way we approached it in Proposition 123, is we set goals for communities. We say we know everyone has an obligation to be part of providing affordable housing. And we set goals to say there are certain numbers of units you should be able to build each year. But then your community gets to decide how you want to go about that. If we're going to build 1,500 units that are affordable in Denver, we can have community conversations about where do we think those go. And in some neighborhoods, it might be quadplexes, or it might be 6 or 8 units. It might be more gentle density. In some places, it might be more density, and that might be for a reason, because you might need the density to establish the kind of walkable communities you're going to need to support a grocery store, or to support retail, or to support restaurant life. And so I think that's something where I think that cities should feel a sense of urgency to build these. But I think you want to have flexibility on where and how you do it. And that ought to be integrated at a city as large as this, with both a citywide plan and then linked to neighborhood level plans. I don't think that every neighborhood has to have the same plan and the same strategy. I do think we should have a collective commitment to making sure we're making the whole city more affordable, and that we think about how that's phased out over time and how it integrates to the infrastructure needs we have and to the lived experience of the residents.
Thank you, Kelly.
What was the question?
It was a long one, but it basically boils down to this neighborhood has worked very hard on its area plan. How do you balance that need to upzone the city with the idea that neighborhoods should be able to decide their future?
Thank you. I probably am going to answer a slightly different question, and then Ed, you can come back and tell me, answer the dang question. Because when I hear upzone the city, that's not what I think we need to do in Denver. This notion that across the board, everything looks the same or has the same density, that we have to be pretty intentional about where we're putting that density. It needs to be around transit. It needs to be around major bus routes along major thoroughfares. That when we think of it that way, then you start to realize, okay, when we're building like that, we have the opportunity and we need to take advantage of building housing that's affordable and a full range in those locations and those places, and take advantage of that opportunity. I also want to just take a second on Proposition 123. While I think all of us hope that there's resources there, I think it is a little gloomier than we talk about sometimes. That money comes from the state. We approved it. It comes from the state when there's excess Tabor revenues. And a few things have happened that I think should have all of our eye on whether and how much of those resources will actually be available to Denver. One is we lowered our income tax. And when we lowered our income tax, that lowers revenue going into the state, which lowers the excess that will be in that tapered revenue. We also have a bit of a slowdown happening. There's some questions about how much that slowdown will be and how great. That'll lower the dollars in that pot of money. And that money is statewide, so we're competing for it. But the other part of Proposition 123 is it requires a 90-day permitting process. It requires that Denver be able to approve affordable housing within 90 days. I'm not sure when we have permitted affordable housing in our history in 90 days. I have a plan to try to help us significantly improve where we're at. But I mention this because when we talk about our commitment to affordability, I think we really are going to have to put our heads together to explore how we fully achieve the kind of affordability we need and how important the private sector is going to be in delivering product to help us get to the goal, particularly on rentals.
Let's talk about that plan for the permitting process. You jumped ahead to another thing I was going to ask about here, whether these folks are owning businesses or would like to add a deck. I'm sure they've banged their head against the wall with Denver's permitting process. So how exactly do you, as one elected official, go in and change that?
Yeah, so the mayor oversees the departments that are all part of that process. The mayor hires the team who oversees the Parks and Rec department, where forestry is, the fire chief, where the fire department is part of this process, the planning director for the planning department, transportation, the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, the building code. All of those departments are under the mayor and they're the responsibility of the mayor. And so there's two things I would do to improve. By the way, our process last summer, I think, was at about 18 months. Today, I think we're over 2 years. On affordability, the team is trying to prioritize affordability, but we're nowhere close to that 90-day requirement. Here's what I would do. Last summer, we had a new affordable housing ordinance pass in the city, and right before it passed, we had a whole bunch of filings come in. So the team was behind, and now we're even further behind. And I can only imagine if you're one of those employees looking at that stack, I'd give up too. There's no hope of trying to catch up. So I would hire contractors to come in and help us get through the backlog and catch up. Get people their answer about what they can do with their proposal or what they can't do. So we get you in the ground. And frankly, getting these projects moving means money to the city too. That's where our tax money comes from, is when we get you up and running. And then the second thing I would do is restructure the entire department. Instead of having all of these silos that we're trying to create a team, I'd create one team with one manager who reports into the mayor, and I would have accountability for metrics and customer service. So we actually start delivering the product you need in the time frame that you need.
Thank you, Mike.
Great. And let me start with the response on Prop 123, because I think the facts are important here. The key is actually the budget surpluses over the next 2 years are $2 billion and then $2.4 billion. And they are growing historically, because what we know fundamentally doesn't work about Tabor is that incomes are increasing faster than the rates of inflation are. And so that means that gap is going to continue to grow, which is why those revenues are permanent and in place. Second part is those dollars come immediately into the Prop 123 fund. It would require a separate piece of legislation from legislators in both chambers and signed by the governor to undo that. I don't anticipate that coming from a statewide ballot measure that people have broadly voted to support. We've never had that before in state history. So those are incredibly solid. Let's talk about the actual permitting process. The way the permitting process is structured is what this requires you to do is have a 90-day process per cycle. So for a concept plan, for a site development plan, for a permitting plan. Most major cities in the state already do that. Colorado Springs has been doing that very simply and regularly. Met with the planning office consistently. They've been working on an accelerated process. They're not far off, but it's got to be fixed. It's got to be tightened. And that's one of the reasons I'm running for mayor, is to make sure we can deliver an office that actually delivers those results. And I think what most people have probably found in this room, if you've had to deal with that office, is it does not exactly feel like a customer service driven experience. It is not one where the primary purpose is, how do I help you get the thing done that you're trying to get done? So I would, yes, add more personnel to that office. I would have 10 more staff to make sure that they can actually meet the volume of demand that are required to deliver it. I would make sure to put in leadership that is deeply committed to hitting these targets and making sure that we have a great customer service based experience. And then I would make sure that the city is rallied around a shared purpose, that we only make housing more expensive the longer we take to permit it. And so that's why we have to make sure we do it both quickly, and we do it professionally, we do it reliably, and that's what I would lead as mayor.
Thank you. I want to turn to a topic that you probably get a lot more questions about and other things, but it's worth dwelling on for just a second here, and that is homelessness. And I ask about that knowing that both of you have put forward plans on the subject that involve spreading the unhoused into housing over larger areas. Mike, with your plan to build tiny home villages, Kelly, your desire to build smaller but more shelters, people could feel safer in that. My question for you is, do you see Cherry Creek playing a role in those plans? And if so, how do you balance the citywide needs with any concerns the neighborhood may have?
It's going to be in the Cherry Creek Mall parking lot is our plan. So I want to say, philosophically, yes, I think every neighborhood has a part in helping solve this problem. But also we've learned some common sense lessons from the efforts to do this before, which is it does not make sense to site these in heavily residential neighborhoods. And we don't have to do that. We have the beauty, I think, of the way that I'm approaching this problem is if you take what I've described as micro communities, you take half-acre or acre vacant lots around the city, you can put 40 or 50 tiny homes on those sites. And then most importantly, you can provide the wraparound services on those sites that people need. That means mental health support, addiction treatment, workforce training, long-term housing support, that both these people are most likely to take advantage of those services and succeed. It also means you have far more flexibility in where you can site those locations. Because right now, if you go to downtown Denver, one of the reasons you'll see heavy concentrations of folks who are unhoused is because almost all of the services for those people in the city of County Denver are in 4 square blocks around the Rockville Square. So if you're not sleeping there, you got to at least come back there every single day, which means you're concentrating the need and you're concentrating the services. When you distribute those services out to communities that are spread out around the city, it's much easier to have far more options for where you could put these communities. And I think the best places we put them have not been heavily residential. They've been more industrial, light commercial. I think one of the most successful sites is the Colorado Village Collaborative site, which is up at 40th and Marion. If you haven't visited, drive up there and take a look. You'll see tiny homes that are beautiful. They're well kept, folks that are getting their lives back together. And it nestles neatly into a neighborhood that you could probably drive by and not notice it. So I think there is a way for us to do this comprehensively and thoughtfully that allows them to be around the city without them being in heavily residential neighborhoods.
Thank you. Kelly?
Ed, I'm going to start by just clarifying a little my homelessness proposal to make sure we're kind of on the same page. So I don't think we have 4 or 5 years to build new shelters or micro communities or tiny houses around the city. I think we have to act with urgency to get people to safer locations. So we have about 1,400 people today who are unsheltered and unhoused. And so my priority would be focusing on getting people shelter or improve their living conditions as quickly as I can. And what I know is we don't have the right space or enough of it to get everyone indoors. So I would temporarily sanction outdoor locations that are safe, that have running water and have bathrooms and support and services coming to people. So we can move people to those because the conditions are horrific today that people are living in. The second thing I would do though, and this is maybe even more important, is work as a region. I don't think Denver can do this alone. I think we've proven we can't do this alone. We have a $254 million budget we're spending on housing today. And we're spending time simply moving people around our city, endlessly sweeping them instead of figuring out how to house and shelter. I met with mayors throughout our region, and 6 mayors in the metro area who are in office today endorsed my homeless plan and endorsed me as a candidate, saying, you're right, we have to do this as a region. Denver is taking more than our fair share because we have the services in this region. And so this is where we really do need our other mayors to help us. And we also need to focus on prevention. Today, more people are tipping into homelessness in our region than we can take out. And so by focusing on some of my housing strategies that are around affordability, preventing someone from losing their housing is not only easier, but it's way less expensive. And about 40% of the people unhoused in our city today have jobs, which is a level of stability we rarely recognize. And we know by rehousing them quickly, they can stabilize their lives. So mine is kind of a range of issues, meeting people where they're at.
Thank you. And I want to take, I think that buzzer is for me. I'm going to take the liberty to ask one last question here to both of you before we get you to wrap up. And it's kind of a big picture question. Cherry Creek leaders have noted in recent years, this neighborhood is a tax donor neighborhood, contributing more tax funding to the city than it typically gets back in specific programs. Now, everyone understands there are needs across the city, particularly in dealing with homelessness that may be more acute in other neighborhoods than here. But how do you ensure neighborhoods like this, frankly, get their money's worth from their tax expenditures? Kelly?
Yeah, I mean, the fundamental purpose of government is to collect revenue from people. I don't mean to collect revenue. I saw that response. To collect our taxes from people based on different structures that we put in place. Meaning, when you earn more, you often pay more. If your home is worth more, you pay more. If you own a property, you pay more. And then we try to distribute that in a manner that delivers basic services for everybody, right? Transportation system, our schools, if you think of it like that. So I appreciate this notion of tit for tat, but we've never structured ourselves that way. I got to start by saying that, because if we had every neighborhood asking that question, I think we'd be in a serious crisis today. That said, I also think every neighborhood deserves the fundamental services that you are paying for. And I think what you would say in Cherry Creek today is you're not getting those services. From transportation to public safety, how can we make sure you're getting the services you deserve today? And I think this is part of fundamentally what a mayor is responsible for in budgeting, is making sure when we're laying out that budget, we're thinking about the service delivery. And we're holding ourselves accountable, not to how much money we give you, but the result we produce with those dollars. And that's the shift I would make as your mayor, is thinking about how do I make sure when you call 911, we actually answer, and within which time frame? How fast does my team get back to you when you reach out to us? My expectation is 24 hours. How fast do we address when you call us with a pothole? And I would fund this neighborhood like I would fund everybody else, with an expectation that you get an outcome and a result, but not necessarily that exact dollar amount. Otherwise, we would be in a crisis if our downtown operated that way, who produces also significant revenue that underwrites everything that happens in our neighborhoods throughout the city.
Thank you. Mike?
My feedback I've gotten is I think what people most fundamentally want when they pay taxes is they want back a city that they're proud of. And that means they want a city that they know that the teachers that serve their kids in their school can afford to live in, whether they live in Cherry Creek, or they live in Lowry, or that they live in Platt Park, or they live in Central Park. You want those folks to be able to live in the city and serve the city. You want to be able to have a city that does not have crime and public safety risks around the city. That's going to be true if you're at home in Cherry Creek, or if you're at a friend's house in Mayoral, or if you're downtown in a Nuggets game. I think those commitments don't stop at any neighborhood boundary. And I think what we ought to be able to deliver first and foremost is a common shared experience that you have that expectation in every neighborhood, and we deliver on that expectation. I think the second one is we ought to be able to have much more direct feedback from each neighborhood to the department heads and to the administration on what you think isn't working, and what you think we should do better. And so one of the things I'll do as part of my engagement strategy is to bring cabinet members to each neighborhood over the course of each year. So every month, there'll be a cabinet member who comes to your neighborhood, sits down, answers questions, hears feedback, takes concerns and criticisms, and then is able to take that feedback directly back to the department that they run or the employees that they work with. Because I think what we have right now is a system where people feel frustrated, they don't often feel heard, they don't know who the right person is to give that feedback to, so they can make sure the problem is corrected. And I think that is how we both get feedback on the front end to make sure the programs and the services we're building are what you want. And we get feedback on the back end to make sure the tax dollars that you spent actually deliver the service that you expected, and you should expect us to do both.
Thank you. All right, based on our early coin flip here, we're going to start with Kelly, having 2 minutes to close, and then we'll go to Mike. So Kelly, take it away.
First, I would just say thanks. Thanks for continuing to invest in this city, to live here, for those who have businesses to invest, because it makes a huge difference. You know, I moved here in 1986 with my husband, and I'll be honest, every single beautiful thing I have in my life is because I chose them. And I suspect you might feel the same way when you think about the incredible diverse neighborhoods that we have throughout our city, or how the arts and cultural experiences we can have here change our lives. Or I think about things like that my family could start a business and start a family in this city and find incredible opportunity, or the outdoor lifestyle we talked about earlier tonight. But I also know it was community for me that changed everything, because my family has had struggles. And I see the families in Denver who are struggling today. I understand how hard it is to put the pieces of your life back together after you lose someone who's been murdered. I understand how much shame someone feels when they need assistance from their government, and how I, as their mayor, can help them find a path back to opportunity as well. But I also understand the pain of addiction and suicide that we see throughout our city today. And what I know is it was community that helped my family come through those things. My family's not special. We're resilient, but so is our city. And I see that resilience. And I know as your mayor, I can lead us to find that path to opportunity, so we don't feel like we have lost those things that make us love Denver so much. And maybe as a first-time candidate, what makes me so proud today are the people who've endorsed me, like Mayor Webb or Wilma Webb or Governor Ritter, or those 1,480 police officers who said, "Kelly, we trust you," or the 600 deputy sheriffs, the 10 former and current members of the Denver City Council, the 6 mayors in the metro area, the 5 mayoral candidates who sat on a stage here with me, saying, "We trust that you can lead our city and make it work for all of us again." And I would love to have your endorsement and vote to do just that.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you all so much for having us tonight. When we all leave this room tonight, you'll go back out to a city that you love. But you will also go out to a city where tonight there will be a mom sitting at a kitchen table with her high school kid, convincing him that he should muster up the courage to go back to school tomorrow, even though he's terrified for his own safety. We will go back to a city where somewhere tonight, a nurse is sitting down with her 2 kids for dinner, worrying at the end of the month that the landlord might just come back and raise the rent one more time, and she's not going to be able to stay in the city. And what does she do with those 2 kids? And somewhere in the city, we'll have a guy with a construction hat and a bag who just worked his last shift, who served 2 tours in Iraq and then got addicted to opioids, and now is trying to figure out where to stay tonight, because he couldn't find a place to stay to be able to make it to the methadone clinic to get treatment, or to make it to his construction shift to get work at the same time. Those are all true about what our city is tonight, but they don't have to be true. What's actually very possible is to build a very different city, where you can say it's possible to preserve the things that we love about this city and still make sure we deliver on a city where you can feel safe in every single neighborhood that you go at any time of day or night. Or you can feel pride that the people that serve your city, whether they're serving you a coffee or teaching your kid to read or keeping you safe when you go to the hospital, can still call this city home in the way that you do. And whether the folks that struggle the most in the city can know we are going to commit to them, we will help find them access to the housing that gets them back up on their feet and back to contribute to society the way that they know they want to. That's the dream of what this city can be. And that's the vision of what we can deliver over the next 8 years with your help. The next 30 days are going to have a massive impact on where this city goes for the next generation. And I would love the chance to build that city we dream of with your support. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you all for coming, for listening, and thank you both, Kelly and Mike, for the conversation here. I hope everybody has come away with this with some thoughts on their ballots. And at this point, I'm going to hand it back to Nick to close us out.
Turn you off.
Thank you, Mike. How about another round of applause for these committed statements? Thank you, Jack, for being here tonight. As usual, a great job. Just a couple of final announcements before we leave this evening. I'm often asked, what is the Cherry Creek Alliance? Cherry Creek Alliance is a relatively new organization, and it is a partnership among the significant business groups that represent this great area. The Cherry Creek North Business Improvement District, the Shopping Center, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Cherry Creek Leadership Council. And we have come together as partners to focus on the issues that are of most significant concern to this community. They include First Avenue, which you heard about tonight, the Cherry Creek Trail. How do we make that more accessible, safer? workforce for sure, and public safety. Those are the issues that the Cherry Creek Alliance is working on. We've come together because we want to represent those issues with one voice. That is really our motto. And so if you have any questions about the Cherry Creek Alliance, we would be more than happy to talk to you about that. Lastly, on your chairs, you have more information about the Alliance, but you also have one of these flyers. I don't think there's one for everybody, but if you wouldn't mind sharing this great school, which is such a tremendous asset to our community, has their annual fun run. It's a special place here at Bromwell. It stands out from other public school options in the area. It has a lower than average class size, a very dedicated, experienced staff, a STEAM lab with 3D printers, alternative seating in classrooms, a commitment to recess. Can you imagine that? Commitment to recess, and consistently high academic achievement. But they have to raise money, and they do so through this fund run. And they're looking to raise about $60,000. So if you get your phones out, you can take a picture of that QR code and make a contribution. And tonight, the Cherry Creek Alliance is going to help prime the giving, and we're going to make a $500 contribution to this effort because we love this school and we love the work that they do and the results that they get. So please take a moment, if you would, and give mightily to Bromwell. Again, I want to thank our candidates. Ed, thank you. I want to thank the Cherry Creek Steering Committee, the Cherry Creek North Neighborhood Association, those who help support us with the audio, the video of this event. And lastly, to all of you, I would just tell you, you have one more obligation, and that is get out and vote and have a safe trip home. Thank you.